All right, everybody, it is Brian, and we're back with more lofting in Fusion 360. So I want to show you how to draw this tent-like structure using Loft, and particularly using guide curves. Part of this will also be making new planes that we can draw on, and so you'll learn how to make planes in some other ways besides just offset planes. So let's get started. So really quick, this isn't a super particular geometry. I will share on course site the sketches that you might want to use for this geometry. Essentially, there is a sketch, and we'll look at it here. 80 by 140 millimeters. I mean, that's pretty small for a tent. I wouldn't be able to fit in there. But we're just creating a structure. So 80 by 140. That's one sketch. We have another sketch, which is guide curves. Actually, the second sketch is just this single point, and that's on a plane that is about 50 millimeters away from that existing plane. So let me just close that, and then we have a guide curve sketch, which is here, which just has a radius of 100. It's attached to that point, which is our second sketch, midpoint along the origin line with a radius of 100. So those are the three sketches you need to draw this. So maybe I want to provide geometry. It's pretty simple. And again, if it's not an exact number, it's not the end of the world. All right, so let's go ahead and start this from scratch, and I'll kind of walk you through the process. So step one, we're going to create a sketch on our top surface. Step two, I'm going to create a rectangle using the center rectangle, just because I'm trying to keep that origin point in the middle. And I'm going to give this a dimension of, I think we said 80 millimeters by 140 millimeters. Okay, so that's my first sketch. So obviously we're starting with that same rectangular loft geometry. My next sketch is going to be interesting. I'm going to use an offset plane for this one, and I'm going to make this perpendicular to the plane that I drew my not perpendicular, sorry, parallel to the plane that I drew my rectangle on. So construct offset plane. I'm going to choose the rectangle. I'm going to move this thing up 50 millimeters away from that surface, and OK. So that creates the plane. And now I'm going to create a new sketch on that plane I just drew. So I turn on, click sketch, click that plane. And here, this is literally going to be a point. So I'm going to go to create. Under my create menu, I go to point, and I'm going to be able to put a point above the origin on that plane. That's it. Because it's only a point and it's at the origin, it's fully defined already. So I'm going to finish that sketch. So now we have this point and this rectangle. So that's actually the geometry I need for my loft. But watch what happens when I loft this. So if I go to create and go to loft, if I choose this and then this, I get this lovely triangle, or pyramid rather. But I want the tent to have that like rounded structure to it. And so this is when we can start to control the loft a little bit more through the use of what are called guide rails. Okay, and you can see they're set as rails here. You can switch to a centerline guide. We're going to choose the guide rails. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to delete that loft that we just did here. So I'm going to click cancel. And I'm going to create a guide rail that actually helps that loft come up and follow that curve. So I want the guide rail to be a curve so that the point here follows that curve up to that point there. In order to do that, that curve needs to go from this point to this point, right? And if we look at our planes, right, if I go back to my origin here, and I turn that on for a second, this plane does not intersect this point and this point. This plane does not intersect this point and this point. This plane does not intersect that point and that point. But a plane that goes through this diagonal line through my rectangle does in fact hit this point and this point, and also this point, which I want actually both of those. So I'm going to turn off my origins again for a second, and we're going to create a new plane. This time I'm going to go to my construction geometry, and I'm going to choose plane at angle. You can also do a plane through 3 points. That would totally work. So I could use this point, the origin point, and that corner point. That would do the same thing. Plane at angle I find to be incredibly useful for lots of different things. So I'm going to choose plane at angle. It's going to ask me to select a line, and I'm going to choose the diagonal line that goes through the corners of my rectangle. And if I look, if I orbit here a little bit, you'll see that that plane right now defaults to the flat surface. But if I rotate that 90 degrees and click OK, that plane now, if I rotate around, goes, you can see it goes through the diagonal of that. So now I'm going to create a new sketch on that plane. But I need to do one more thing before I can draw on my curve. Because what I want is I want to be able to access this point and this corner point. The origin is accessible anyway, because the origin is always accessible because it's one of my origin areas. But this point is not. That's specific to the geometry of the rectangle. And that is not selectable unless you force fusion to make it selectable. And the way we do that is by going to Create, and down, Project and Include. And I'm going to project, and it's going to ask me for the things I want to project. I'm going to project this point, and this point. And if they weren't on the plane, it would actually project perpendicular to that plane. Because all 3 of these are already on the plane, really it's not doing any projection, it's just allowing those to be selectable. So I'm going to click OK, and you'll see they turn purple. Now what I'm going to do is go to Create, Arc, 3-point arc. I'm going to click this top point, the end point, and then I'm going to create, the arc that way. I'm going to give this dimension. This has a radius of 100 to form that arc. And that's going to be 1/2 of my guide curve. I also want to have a guide curve that goes from here down to this corner. And so what I need to do is I need to mirror this guy. So my mirror line actually goes from my origin point up to this point because this point sits directly above the origin point. So now I'm going to go to my line command. I'm going to click that point. I'm going to click my origin point. I'm going to click on that and make it construction geometry. And then I'm going to mirror. Objects to mirror, just this one curve. Mirror line, I'm going to select that and click OK. Fully defined sketch. It has all the points it needs. Now I'm going to finish that sketch. So that's 1/2 of my my guide curves. I now need to create a guide curve that goes from this corner to this point and this point to that point. And so I need to create yet another plane. So this is good practice, right? We get to do that plane thing again. So I'm going to go to Construct, Plane at Angle, choose this line this time. Again, 90 degrees, right? That brings it through that diagonal. Click OK. I have to once again project. So I'm going to go to Create a Sketch on this plane. I'm going to orbit a little bit out of plane so I can see what's going on. Create, Project, Include, Project. The corner point here, thank you. This point, and that point. Oh, you didn't like that. Why didn't you like that? There we go. All right, so we got those 3 points. We actually don't want this line. Okay, that's fine. We have that little line also selected. We don't need to use it. Okay, so same deal. Create arc, 3-point arc. This point here. Add a sketch dimension. Radius of 100. Doesn't need to be the same, but if we want our tent to be symmetric, it does. I could have projected this. Maybe I'll try that. Let's try to project this line here as well. So let's go to Project, Include, Project this line. Okay. Now I don't need to redo define that middle point or that midline for my mirror line. Now I can go to mirror. The object I want to mirror is this one. The mirror line is this purple one, and click OK. So just by projecting that geometry, I can use that to create these references. Once I do that, I finish the sketch. So now we're ready to create the loft. And so I'm going to orbit around here. Actually, I'm going to go to my home view so I can see what's going on. Go to create, go to loft. Same deal. I'm going to go this to this point. It's going to make that pyramid. But this time, under rails, I'm going to click the little pointer icon here. That's going to allow me to select my rails. And you'll see what happens as I start to select these. I'm going to click this guy. Oh, that's kind of a cool geometry, right? So it's using just one of those. And I can choose this guy. And now it's using both of those. Right, so that's interesting. But I want to add this guy and this guy as well. That rounds out my geometry and finishes up the symmetry of that tent. So I click OK, and that's how we deal with the tent. So again, we can control that loft by adding those guide curves. They are just like any other sketch. The better you define that sketch, the more exact that guide curve will be, the more exact the overall geometry that you have will be. Really quick, I do want to show you, if we go into Loft, Edit Feature, you can change some of these, the way that these guide curves react to one another. So Profile 2, where it says connected, I can go to Sharp, or I can go to Point Tangent, and you'll actually see it starts to make this a little bit more bulbous here. If I zoom around, if I kind of look at this side view here, you can kind of see how this is bulbous here on the side, and watch what happens when I turn back to Sharp. That goes away. So it's creating less of a tangency at this point. So it's, instead of trying to make this really flat here, it's making it much more sharp as it enters that point. So you can create those tangents relationships by changing the end condition here for each of the profiles that it intersects. So that's it. That's the tent. Again, pretty simple geometry, and that should be easy for you to follow along. All right, so I'm going to go back to my home view, and there you have it. Thank you for tuning in. I have yet another loft, which I think is actually a really cool and exciting project that I'm going to do for you in the next video. We're going to draw a little lotion bottle. So tune in for that one. You'll see it posted just next. Thanks. Bye.